The wind scraped down from the ridge like a blade, dry and sharp, slicing through the folds of the widow's dress as she bent to gather what little wood she could find. Her hands were red with cold, her fingers stiff as twigs, but still she worked. Behind her, the sod cabin hunched low against the December plains, its walls patched with old quilts and canvas to hold back the cold. Smoke barely limped from the crooked chimney. The sky had not broken in days, just a lid of cloud pressed low enough to touch. Nothing stirred, not even the coyotes. Inside, the children whimpered, but she did not turn. Their cries were a part of the air now, like the whistling through the cracks or the dull ache in her chest that never let up. She had run out of ways to hush them. No more stories, no more flour, no more lies. A crow picked at something near the woodpile. She stared at it, then threw a stone, missing by far. The bird flew up and settled again a few feet away, indifferent. She hated that, the way the world didn't care one bit. Not about the hunger or the cold or the husband who'd been buried shallow beneath the bluff with only a pile of rocks to keep the wolves out. She'd sat there as the wind covered the grave in dust, too tired to cry. There had been no service, no neighbors, no him. It had been 33 days since the fever took him. She didn't know why that number clung to her. Maybe because it was the same number of steps from the front door to the stream when it wasn't frozen. She counted it every time she walked, her boots slipping on the brittle crust of snow, the children's tin cups swinging from her belt like dead weight. The baby had stopped nursing 2 nights ago. She didn't tell the older two, just tucked the child against her skin and tried not to feel how light he'd become. A kind of sleep had taken him, soft, breathless, still. The woodpile was down to splinters and frozen dung. She picked up a few pieces and straightened slowly, eyes stinging. That was when she heard the hooves. She froze. Not memory, not thunder, real hooves. Slow, deliberate, coming up the rise. She turned, one hand shielding her eyes. The rider came into view like a figure out of some half-forgotten tale, coat heavy with dust, hat low over his face, a long rifle slung across his saddle. His horse was lean and tired, but it kept its pace, stepping careful through the snow. He didn't speak, not at first, just tipped his hat when he drew close enough to see her clearly. Her heart gave one hard thud, then settled into a wary, fast rhythm. Stranger. Out here, that could mean anything. Nothing good ever came from the road anymore. She clutched the wood tighter to her chest. The man didn't reach for his gun, didn't move to dismount, just looked at her with eyes she couldn't quite make out beneath the brim. "You got children in there?" he asked finally, voice quiet but deep enough to carry. She didn't answer. "I heard him crying a mile off," he said, his tone not unkind. "Sounded like wolves at first. You alone out here?" Still, she said nothing. He nodded like he understood, then swung down from the saddle. His boots crunched the ice. He stepped forward, slow, careful not to spook. "I ain't here to harm you," he said. "Name's Eli McCrae. I been riding north, following the river forks. Saw smoke, that's all." She stared at him. He looked like any man older than 30, younger than 50, lean and weather-beaten. His coat was patched, one of his gloves was missing a finger, but something about the way he stood upright, but not proud, kept her from turning her back. Inside the cabin, the baby made no sound. The older children, huddled near the hearth, had gone quiet too, sensing the change. "You got food?" she asked finally, voice hoarse. He shook his head. "Some jerky, maybe. But I got a mule with sacks, tools, cloth, some beans, I think. Could trade." She studied him hard, then nodded once and stepped aside. He didn't move. "You sure?" he asked. She closed her eyes for half a breath, then opened them. "They're scared," she said, "but I can't make 'em stop crying. Not anymore." He nodded again, took the reins, and led the horse toward the lean-to. As he passed her, he said it low, like it was just for her to hear. "Don't cry. I'm here now." The words were simple. Foolish, maybe. But they hit something deep, something brittle she'd kept from breaking too long. She didn't weep, but her arms trembled as she turned and followed him inside. The cabin smelled of ash, sour milk, and damp wool. Light filtered in through a rag nailed over the broken window, barely strong enough to reach the corner where the children crouched, wide-eyed and silent. Eli stepped in slow, ducking under the low beam, letting the door shut soft behind him. The cold still seeped in through the cracks. He took off his hat and held it in one hand, looking at the children, then at the fire no more than a huddle of glowing coals. A pot hung above it, blackened and empty. The woman had gone still beside the wall, the bundle of wood still clutched in her arms, like she didn't know what to do now that she'd let him in. Eli didn't speak. He knelt near the hearth and laid his gloves down. Then, pulling his pack from his shoulder, he set it between his knees and opened it, slow and without flair. He took out a flat square of cloth, unwrapped it, and placed 4 pieces of dried venison on the floorboards, near the children. The girl, maybe 8, stared at it, unmoving. The boy beside her looked younger, too thin, cheeks hollow. Neither reached out. "You can take it," Eli said. "Won't bite." The woman stepped forward and put the wood down by the hearth, crouching to stoke the coals with a cracked iron poker. Her hands were chapped raw. She didn't look at him. The older child inched forward finally, took a piece, and handed one to her brother. They chewed slow, lips barely moving, eyes never leaving Eli. "They haven't had meat in days," the woman said, quiet. "I boiled the last of the beans 2 nights ago. Ground acorns for flour. Burned my baking stone clean through." Eli nodded. He unbuckled his saddlebag next and stood to carry it to the hearth. "Got more out on the mule. I'll bring it in. Salt, coffee, couple tins of peaches I'd been saving for Christmas." She stood up, brushing her skirt. "Christmas passed." "I know." His voice softened. "Still might be worth something." They worked in silence for a while. He brought in the supplies, stacking them near the hearth. She boiled water. The children stared but did not speak. The youngest still hadn't stirred. Eli noticed, but said nothing yet. When she poured water over the dried meat to soften it, she leaned heavy on the table with one hand. He saw the wear in her eyes, then deep and cracked as a droughted well. "You bury him yourself?" he asked quietly. She didn't look at him, just nodded. "Used a pickaxe and a spade. The ground was near frozen. Took 2 days. No one else around?" "Nearest soul's 4 miles east. I sent word." She paused. Nobody came. Eli breathed through his nose and looked away. "I believe you." The stew was thin but hot. The children ate first. Then the woman sat down and spooned the broth slowly, careful not to finish too fast. Eli didn't touch a bite until they were done. He took the last dregs without comment. That night, the wind howled harder. Snow came in fine drifts under the door and along the windowsills. Eli laid his bedroll near the door, close to his rifle. The woman curled up with the baby near the hearth, wrapping him in every scrap of warmth she had. Before the fire went out, Eli's voice came low in the dark. "You got a name?" She didn't speak at first. Then, Miriam Stowe. "How long you been out here?" 3 years. Came west with Thomas. Said he'd build us a better life. Claimed a homestead. He died before we finished the roof." Eli shifted in his bedroll, the leather creaking. "I ain't come to steal anything, Miriam." "I know." Her voice was quieter now. "But it's strange, not knowing why you're still breathing when someone else isn't." Silence settled between them. The fire clicked softly. "You reckon you'll stay out here?" he asked. "I don't know where else to go." She looked down at the baby, her hand resting on the tiny chest that no longer rose and fell. "I think I already left, just not with my feet yet." Eli turned his face to the ceiling. "I had a wife once, long time ago. She died birthing our second, lost the baby too. I ran from the grief, joined up with the Rangers, then drifted. Never stayed long in one place after that." Miriam didn't answer. But for the first time, Her eyes found his across the low glow of the dying fire. "Don't run from us," she said finally. "If you're gonna leave, walk. Don't run." He nodded once, solemn. "I won't run." And that was the first night in 34 that Miriam didn't cry. If you've ever felt abandoned but longed to endure, subscribe for the stories ahead. Morning came slow, pale and soundless, like the breath of something not yet alive. Snow had drifted up to the windows, muffling everything. Eli rose before the light touched the horizon, boots crunching on frozen earth. He went outside, fed the mule, broke ice in the trough, and stood for a while in the thin hush, watching the ridge. Nothing moved. Inside, the cabin felt tighter somehow. Still full of sorrow, but not so hollow. Miriam sat wrapped in a patched shawl, one hand resting over the still bundle in her lap. She hadn't moved him. She just held him, as if he might remember warmth and come back. Eli built up the fire without speaking. The children were curled on the floor under a quilt, their small limbs tangled together. The girl opened her eyes when he tossed in another log, then quickly shut them again, pretending. "I can make a coffin," he said quietly. "Small one, birchwood from the edge of the bluff." Miriam looked up, slow. Her eyes were red, but dry. "You know how, enough to do it proper." She nodded once. It was all she could manage. Eli didn't ask if she wanted help. He simply went, took the hatchet and rope and hiked up the rise, the snow breaking beneath his boots in deep sighs. The birch trees stood pale and peeling, like bones against the sky. He worked without rest, his breath steaming in short bursts, until the wood was cut, stripped, and tied. The wind whistled, but it never spoke. Not today. By late afternoon, the coffin was done. Crude, but strong. He lined it with what scraps he could find, a flour sack, some leftover wool. He didn't look at the body when Miriam laid the baby inside. Just stood back, hat in hand, while she tucked a single button from Thomas's old coat beside the child's head. A strange thing to offer, but grief didn't follow rules. They carried him up the ridge together. The children followed without sound. No preacher, no psalm. Only the sound of snow creaking under boots, the wind tugging at skirts, and the slow rasp of Eli's shovel. They dug through frozen clay, side by side. When it was deep enough, he laid the coffin in. Miriam placed one hand on the lid, held it there, then stepped back. Eli filled the grave. When it was done, he stood over it and said, "He was loved." Miriam nodded. Then the girl stepped forward. Her name, Eli had learned, was Ruth, and placed a piece of blue ribbon on the mound. "For his hair," she whispered. "Mama said it was the color of cornflowers." They walked back down in silence, the light fading, smoke rising from the cabin like a ribbon of mourning. That night, Miriam made biscuits from the new flour, dry but warm. The children ate with hunger and thanks. Eli fixed the latch on the door, stuffed more rags in the cracks, and said nothing when the boy crawled over and leaned against his arm before falling asleep. Later, when the cabin had gone quiet, Miriam stood at the window, her face faint in the firelight. "I never meant to survive this," she said. Eli sat at the table, oil lamp flickering beside him. He didn't look up. "Most of us don't," he replied, "but we do anyway." She turned from the window. "Why'd you stop here?" He didn't answer for a long moment. The lamp hissed. "I was gonna ride on," he said finally, "but the crying, it sounded like a sound I used to make, a long time ago." Miriam's eyes softened, and something in her posture changed. Less rigid, not whole, but unbroken. "You still planning to ride on?" Eli met her gaze. "I don't know yet." The next morning, he was still there. He mended the fence, split wood, fetched water. Miriam worked beside him, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, hands blackened with pitch. They did not speak of what they'd buried, or what they feared, or what had not yet healed. But something had shifted. In the evening, Eli taught the boy, Samuel, how to hold a knife right, how to cut kindling without nicking his thumb. The girl sat close by, listening, pretending not to. Miriam watched from the stoop, her hands idle for the first time in weeks. She didn't smile. But she didn't cry, either. And when Eli looked up from where he crouched beside the boy, he met her eyes and gave a slow nod. He was still here. The snow softened over the days that followed, warming just enough to reveal the brown earth beneath. Mornings came with the sound of sparrows pecking around the chicken coop, what was left of it, and the steady creak of Eli's boots as he walked the perimeter. The prairie, though still raw and wind-cut, had lost a bit of its bite. There were faint signs of life again, nothing loud, nothing grand, but signs. Eli had fixed the roof first. He patched the missing boards with lumber salvaged from a fallen barn half a mile off, and covered the rest with canvas soaked in pitch. Miriam watched him from the garden rows, her sleeves rolled, her arms red with cold as she turned the soil with a rusted spade. "It's too early," she muttered once, when she caught him watching. He raised an eyebrow. "And yet you're out here breaking your back." She glanced at the ground, then wiped her brow with a dirt-streaked wrist. "I reckon, if I move the earth, something might answer." That night they ate stew with wild onions he'd foraged from near the creek. The fire burned steady, the wind had calmed. Ruth read aloud from a worn Bible, while Samuel curled against Eli, now comfortable enough to sleep there. Miriam sat on the floor, her feet tucked beneath her skirt, eyes closed, head resting against the wall. She wasn't asleep, just still. Eli couldn't remember the last time he'd wanted to stay somewhere. Not just survive, but stay. He kept that thought to himself. A week passed, then another. He moved his saddlebag from beside the door to the loft, rolled his bedroll up, and never unrolled it again. At some point, without a word, Miriam cleared a shelf in the cupboard. He filled it with his things. She didn't speak of it. Neither did he. But the quiet between them had changed shape, no longer heavy, but full. One afternoon, as they worked on fixing the chicken wire, Miriam said, "You always this useful." Eli chuckled under his breath. "Only when folks let me be." She tied off the wire and straightened, pressing her hands into the small of her back. Thomas never could fix much. He could build a table, maybe. But if it broke, he'd just curse and start over. He was a farmer? Not really. Just a man who hated the city more than he feared the land. Eli nodded. "That'll make a settler out of anyone." They stood there for a while, side by side, watching the horizon. The silence between them felt easy now, worn in. Then she said it low. "I think I forgot what it felt like, not being afraid." He didn't speak at first. Then he reached down, picked up the hammer, and passed it to her. "You're still afraid," he said. "You just work anyway. That's the difference." That night, Ruth asked Eli if he'd ever been in love. He looked over her head to where Miriam stirred the pot, her back to them. "Once," he said, "long time ago." "Did she die?" Ruth asked, blunt as only a child could be. "Yes." "Do you think she'd want you to be happy?" Eli was quiet a long time. "I think she'd want me to be useful." Ruth thought about that, then nodded. "Mama's better when you're here." Miriam didn't turn, but her hand slowed, and for a moment Eli thought she might speak. She didn't, but she didn't have to. He was beginning to understand the language of what went unspoken. They shared more over time. He told her about the Rangers, about the years he'd spent chasing ghosts across the plains. He spoke of the border towns, the lawless nights, the weight of a badge that never brought much peace. She told him of Illinois, of lace and carriages, of the scream her mother let out when she chose Thomas Stowe and not the banker's son. He was kind, once, she said, and then the land beat it out of him. Eli didn't offer pity, just said, "It beats something out of all of us, leaves only what's true." She looked at him, her eyes softer now. "And what's left in you, Eli McRae?" He didn't flinch. "Still finding out?" That night, she asked him to sleep inside the loft instead of by the fire. It wasn't a request for closeness. Not yet. But it was a request all the same. He climbed the ladder without a word. Spring came in slow breaths. The land thawed, and the river cracked and flowed again. Birds returned, the fence held, the garden greened. Miriam took her shawl off more often. Her hair, once tied tight, began to fall loose by evening. Samuel followed Eli like a shadow. Ruth read aloud each night, and once Eli caught her drawing a picture of the cabin, with him standing outside it. He didn't say a word, just folded it and tucked it in his coat. "And Miriam?" She laughed. Once, at a joke he made about the mule. It was small, short, and surprised her. But it stayed with him all night. It was the sound of someone coming back to life. The first letter arrived on a morning that smelled of thawed earth and smoke. Ruth found it tucked beneath a stone near the gate-post, sealed in wax and smudged from travel. She brought it in with red cheeks and wide eyes, handing it to Miriam like it might burn her. Miriam turned it over slowly, her fingers pale against the yellowed parchment. There was no return mark, no name, just her own, scrawled in a hand she hadn't seen in years. She didn't open it right away. She stood in the doorway, the cold wind tugging at her skirt, staring at the writing. Ruth and Samuel watched her from the table. Eli was outside splitting logs. He saw her through the window, the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her breath caught. When he stepped inside, her eyes met his. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, but her voice gave her away. "It's from Thomas's family. I can feel it." Eli didn't push. "You want me to step out?" She looked down at the letter. No. She opened it slow. Read it slower. The silence stretched. When she folded the paper, her hands shook. "What is it?" Ruth asked. "What do they want?" Miriam didn't speak for a long time. Then she walked to the fire, crouched low, and placed the letter into the flames. "They want the children," she said. "His sister. She says they belong back east. That I've failed them." Ruth gasped, crawling closer. "You're not giving us to them." "No," Miriam said, fierce now. "I'm not." Eli stood still, hands by his sides. "Do they have any legal claim?" "She says she's hiring a man, a lawyer or a sheriff, someone to come. Says I'm not fit to raise them in that wilderness." Her voice cracked on the word. Eli's jaw tightened. "They'd have to get through me." Miriam turned toward him. Her face was pale, but there was fire in her eyes. "You don't owe us anything, Eli." "Don't say that," he said. "Don't take that from me." She looked at him a long while. And then, for the first time, she stepped toward him, not away. She placed a hand on his chest, the space over his heart. "I don't want you here out of pity," she said. "I'm not here for that," he replied. She nodded once, then softly, then, "Stay." He covered her hand with his. "I already did." That night, they sat at the table, after the children went to sleep. The fire crackled low, and the sky outside was full of stars. "They'll send someone," Miriam said. "They've got money, influence. They'll come with paper and threat." Eli leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Then we show them what family looks like, what survival means out here. You think some man in a wool coat's gonna last an hour on this land?" She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "You're serious?" "Dead." Miriam looked down at her hands. "What if they win, Eli?" He reached across and took her hand. "They won't." She looked up, and this time, when she leaned forward, it wasn't grief that guided her, it was want, real and quiet and earned. They kissed, slow and still and sure, like two people who'd learned the weight of silence and how much a small thing could mean. In the loft later, curled into him, Miriam whispered, "I used to think I'd never feel anything again, not joy, not sorrow, just the drag of days. Then you came." Eli brushed a lock of hair from her face. "I didn't come to save anyone," he said. She smiled, faint and tired. "You didn't. You just stayed. That's more than most." They slept like that, skin to skin, the past heavy behind them but no longer in front. And out in the dark, beyond the firelight, something watched. Something wore a badge, rode a gray horse, carried a sealed letter in his saddlebag. He'd arrive by sunrise. And when he did, he'd find more than a widow and her children. He'd find a man with nothing to lose, and a woman with everything to protect. The rider came at dawn. The frost still clung to the grass, and mist moved low across the fields like breath from some sleeping giant. Miriam stood on the porch, arms folded, shawl tight around her shoulders. Eli was already saddled, rifle across his back, one hand resting light on the pommel. He didn't wear his gun low like some wanted poster specter, but it was there, plain and sure, and his eyes held the same weight as the steel. The man who rode up was young, too clean for the land. Brown coat, city-made, gloves still pressed at the seams. He had the look of someone who'd never chopped wood or walked 10 miles just to fetch water. He dismounted slow, careful, like he knew enough not to swagger. "Mrs. Stowe?" he asked. Miriam didn't answer. The man took a step forward, glancing at Eli. "Name's Denton Harrow. I've come on behalf of the Calvert family. I'm here for the children." Eli stepped down from the saddle. "You're here for what now?" Denton cleared his throat. "I have legal documents." He reached into his coat and pulled out a packet, crisp and too white against the dust. Eli didn't move. "You planning to take them by force?" "No, sir," Denton said. "But I've been authorized to escort them east. Their aunt has secured full guardianship. It's all signed by Judge Holbrook himself. The court—" "There is no court out here," Miriam said, her voice sharp and flat. "Only land, and blood, and work." "I don't aim to make this unpleasant," Denton said, "but I have the law." "Is the law going to raise them?" Eli asked. "Is it going to teach the boy how to hunt, or how to mend fence before the frost comes down hard? You think paper matters more than the hands that feed them?" "They've got a home waiting," Denton said. "A warm one, with servants, tutors." Miriam stepped forward now. "They had a home. They have one still." Denton looked between them. He wasn't foolish. He saw the closeness, saw the shape of something he hadn't been warned about. "You're not their kin," he said to Eli. "You've no legal claim." "I don't need one," Eli said. "I'm not leaving." Denton hesitated. "You'd really raise another man's children out here? In this place?" Eli turned, slowly, to look at Miriam. Her face was calm, but her fists were clenched at her sides. "I'd die for them," Eli said. Miriam stepped beside him. "And I already did. Once, when Thomas passed, when I buried my youngest, and I came back. They don't need wealth. They need steadiness." Denton's face faltered for the first time. He looked at Ruth and Samuel, who stood just inside the doorway, watching. "Let me show you something," Eli said. He led Denton around the side of the house, past the garden rows now sprouting green, past the patched roof, the new fence, the repaired barn doors swinging gentle in the breeze. They stopped at the grave beneath the bluff. The baby's marker stood there, hand-carved, simple. "She buried her child with her own hands," Eli said. "Alone. Then she raised the others up out of that same dirt. If you think they'd be better off in lace collars and candlelit halls, you never seen what love really is." Denton took off his hat. For the first time, he looked ashamed. "I was sent here to bring them back," he said. "I thought I was doing right." Eli didn't answer. Denton stood still for a long time. Then he turned back toward the house. He looked at Miriam. "I'll say I couldn't find you. You don't have to lie," she said. "Just tell them we stayed." He nodded once, mounted up, and rode off without another word. When the sound of hooves faded, Eli turned to her. "I thought we'd have to fight," he said. "We did," she said, "just not with guns." That night, they sat out on the porch, watching the sky shift from orange to black. Samuel lay with his head in Eli's lap, Ruth read by lantern light. Miriam leaned her head against Eli's shoulder. "You still plan on drifting?" she asked. "No," he said. "You sure?" "I'm sure." She took his hand, worn and scarred and strong. Inside, On the table sat the letter Denton had left behind, untouched, unopened. The wind moved through the grass like a hymn. They were no longer waiting. They were building. If this story touched a hidden place in you, don't let it end here. Subscribe and walk with us on the dusty road ahead.